What is up, people? Welcome back to another video on this channel. In today's video, I'm going to be doing an equipment ranking guide for every single equipment for every single hero in the game. And hopefully it'll give you guys an idea of how equipments rank in terms of their pure strength, in my opinion. I'm hoping that this will help you guys to make decisions of which equipments to upgrade in which order. And also I figured that this guide was probably needed due to the slightly recent nerf of the Eternal Tome, as well as the addition of the Heroic Torch in the game. So without further ado, let's start with the Barbarian King. So at the time of recording this video, the Barbarian King has 7 equipments, with 3 of those being epic. But let's start right with our number 1 ranking. I'm sure you guys will not be surprised to hear that I have the Spiky Ball at number 1. This equipment is used in Dragon strategies and Root Rider strategies, and it is really good to help boost the King's damage and health, as well as providing him with a huge amount of damage when you actually press the ability. At the number 2 spot then, I have the Snake Bracelet. Of course, again, used in every single Root Rider strategy, as well as in Dragon strategies. This is definitely the favourite combo in the top pro meta. As well as that, the snakes give a lot of tanking to the king, and they are especially good against Earthquake Boots. He also does have passive boosts to his health and to his damage. At the number 3 spot then, we have the Earthquake Boots, which have since been replaced, of course, by the snakes in most armies. Still usable in fireball armies and, armies where you're going to be hero diving the king, as opposed to having him run on the outside of the base. At the number 4 spot, we have the Giant Gauntlet. Again, a bit of a classic, a bit outdated. The first epic equipment that we had used to be really good with the Raise Gem, but now it is not used very commonly. In the number 5 spot, we have the Vamp Stash. Could be usable in some Dragon strategies, but generally this is only an equipment that you will use until you get better equipments on the king. As well, we have the Raise Gem in place number 6, and finally the Barb Puppet at place number 7. These equipments are just generally quite underwhelming and could do with a nice buff. Moving on then to our beloved Archer Queen at the number 1 spot. Again, I'm sure you won't be surprised, I have the Giant at the number 1 spot. This equipment is literally completely busted. To get a giant that has 16,000 hit points and I think around 900 damage per second at the press of a button is super OP. This equipment has definitely saved some of my attacks in the past. At the number 2 spot, we have the Magic Mirror, of course. Another really strong equipment. You get 3 queens, you get them for 25 seconds. Normally they don't die, so you get them for that full time. And these queens can boost the damage of your Root Riders so much. And especially in other strategies as well, such as the Fireball, where you're going to use the queen to hero dive and the king can go in front and tank for these queens, and they can do so much damage. At the number 3 spot, I have the Giant Arrow, of course, used mostly for air attacks. It can still snipe those air defenses, as they did not add any HP to the air defenses along with the Town Hall 17 updates. At the number 4 place, I have the Healers, generally quite outdated as they were replaced by the Giant when that equipment came out in April 2025. And at the number 5 spot, we have the Invis Vial. You could argue it is still usable for queen charges, even though I would prefer, if I was doing a queen charge, to use the Giant and the Magic Mirror. But it can be useful when you're trying to push the RC into the base. You use the Archer Queen with the Jelly to funnel some buildings, and the Invis Vial works really well with that combo. At the number 6 spot, we have the Frozen Arrow. Similar to the Giant Gauntlet, it used to be the number 1 pick, however has since been replaced by some slightly newer equipments. And of course, in last place, we have the very underwhelming Archer Puppet, which did receive a buff where the archers remain invisible, but to be honest, this equipment is still absolutely trash. Let's move on to the Minion Prince, where I of course have the Dark Orb at the number 1 place. The Minion Prince has started to see a much higher use rate. He's working his way into strategies such as Fireball. As well, some people use the Minion Prince with Root Riders. And of course, the Orb is super strong when helping with Dragon attacks. At the number 2 spot, I have the Dark Crown. This is of course the newest epic, and although it is slightly underwhelming as an epic equipment, it is better than the Henchman Puppet in my opinion, which of course we have the Henchman Puppet in the number 3 place. You of course do not get the invisibility with the Dark Crown, however it does provide a lot more value, because if you have the Phoenix on the Minion Prince, you can get a lot of extra value from the Phoenix compared to if you're using the Henchman Puppet, where you would not get as much value from that pet. At the number 4 spot then we have the Metal Pants. It was fairly usable for a little while, but then eventually people switched back to the Henchman Puppet, and now it is just a forgotten equipment which I would not recommend upgrading at all. And of course in the bottom spot we have the Noble Iron. Generally quite underwhelming, basically just a copy and paste of the Rocket Spear on the Royal Champion, but nowhere near as strong. Moving on to the Warden then, you may be surprised to hear that I have the Rage Gem in the number 1 spot. This equipment is so good in fireball attacks. It is now my favourite, and definitely the favourite of every single pro player, to bring the Rage Gem on the Warden as opposed to the Eternal Tome. And speaking of the Eternal Tome, I do still acknowledge its strength and have it in the number 2 position, mostly because it is completely necessary for air attacks and is definitely usable for Root Rider attacks. In the number 3 spot then I have the Healing Tome, which again is very useful for air armies as well. Of course it's useful for Root Riders. I use the Healing Tome, and the Root Rider version with the Eternal Tome also would use the Healing Tome, I think, as opposed to the Rage Gem. So rather reluctantly, I have the Fireball in the number 4 position. In terms of raw strength, I do think it is up there. However, it only really goes with one strategy, being the Warden Walk, so it's not very versatile if you do choose to dump all your ores into this equipment. I believe you do need to get it to about level 26 to where it is completely usable. At the number 5 spot then, we have the Life Gem. When I think about this equipment, I can only think that it has one use case, being the Super Hogs, hence why I have it in this position. I do believe it is better than the number 6 equipment, being the Heroic Torch, the brand new Warden equipment. I just think this equipment is very underwhelming at its current state, and it's definitely going to need a buff if it is going to work its way into our current meta. But feel free to go back and watch my video on this equipment to get a better understanding of why I've put this equipment so low. And then of course we have in the bottom spot the Lava Loon Puppet. This thing is just absolutely trash. There's no use case whatsoever for this equipment. So finally, we are left with the Royal Champion, where of course I have the number 1 equipment as the E-Boots. This equipment is so pivotal to every single strategy right now, apart from the Fireball, which leads me on to the number 2 equipment on the Royal Champion, being the Spear. This equipment is really good with Root Riders. It can be used with Dragons as well, if you are choosing to use the Spear off the bat, as opposed to using the Haste Vial later into the attack. And it is also very useful with Fireball, so that the RC can clean up some of the back end defenses. In the number 3 spot then, I have the Haste Vial. As I previously mentioned, I do believe that the Haste Vial is the better equipment choice for Dragons, and it can also be used on Root Riders. You can use the Haste Vial to set up the Spirit Walk and get slightly more value. However, you do not have the Spear on the back end, which I'm going to show you guys obviously in this replay here, where I normally use the Spear to go in and snipe the Town Hall for me in Root Riders. At the number 4 spot then, I have the Seeking Shield, which pairs really well with the Rocket Spear. This is probably my favourite choice of equipment if you're doing a Fireball attack, hence why I have this equipment at the number 4 spot. And at the number 5 spot, I have the Hog Puppet. This equipment used to be really good paired with the Rocket Spear around about the Town Hall 16 meta. I do believe Synchronic started using that combo, and it picked up quite nicely until of course the E-Boots were released and everyone switched to the Spirit Walk, where the Spear and the Haste Vial are just simply better options for your attack. And finally, we of course have the Life Gem, which is again another very underwhelming hero equipment that could definitely do with a buff in this current meta to make it usable again. But there we go, that is all the equipment ranked for this video. Let's get into the recap for today. Okay, there we go. As I said, that is every single hero equipment in the game ranked in terms of their strength level. If you guys did agree with my ranking, let me know in the comments. And if you think I got something wrong, I'd also love to hear your opinion. But that was all from me today. This video did take me quite a long time to edit and get everything together, so I would appreciate a like, and that would help me out a ton. Thank you guys for watching as always, and I will see you later. Goodbye.